Hey everybody, welcome to So I've Been Told. I am your host, Adam Kramer. My guest on today's episode is CJ Campbell. CJ is the author of The Zen of Beard Trimming, Stories of Punk Rock, Poverty, and the Search for Peace. He is also one of the hosts of the Vultures Like Me podcast, and just an all-around great dude. So I hope you all enjoy the conversation that we had. Before we get to that, I just want to let you know, let's say you found a link to this episode on Facebook and you're on the Podbean page. I just want to let you know that you can find us on iTunes as well. I'm a part of a network called the Podcast of Pennsylvania, so if you look up Podcast of Pennsylvania on iTunes, you can find this episode in the feed right there. I'm not living in Pennsylvania anymore, but I'm really good friends with some of the people that run the Podcast of Pennsylvania network, so they graciously allowed me to be a part of it, even though I live up here in the great white north of Rochester, New York. Anyway, I'll talk to you after the interview. I hope you enjoy it. Hello.
Hey man.
Dude, how's it going?
Going okay. I've been spending most of the day writing and listening to a podcast, playing a little Skyrim, eating French Toast Crunch.
Living the dream.
Living the dream.
Well, I listened to your podcast today.
Did you listen to the mini one or the full episode?
Well, I listened to the mini one today, and I've listened to both of them on the days they came out.
Nice. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I dig it. All right, so you wrote a book, and can you tell me a bit about the book you wrote, or tell the audience a little bit about the book you wrote? Because I know about it. I read it.
Yeah, it's a memoir about a 5-year period of my life, from about age 21 to about 26, called The Zen of Beard Trimming, Stories of Punk Rock, Poverty, and the Search for Peace.
Awesome. Yeah, there were a lot of references to punk rock. It's in the name. Most of the people I've been talking to have played in bands, so I'm excited to talk to somebody who you're an author. It's not your main thing isn't playing in a band, and that's been most of my guests so far. So I like changing things up. Have you ever? I know I read there was a part in your book where you're talking about doing some vocals in a band. So have you? Is that something that's been a part of your life? And well, how did? I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I'm coming in cold. I just ate dinner and walked in my house and called you.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm not judging you. Whereas I have the palsy, you have the mouth palsy. So just accept that.
Anyway, so how does punk rock play a role in your story? And have you ever? What's your experience with playing in bands and going to shows? Or have you played in bands first of all? And just tell me a little bit about your background in that.
Well, I have played in bands. I can scream like nobody's business, and it's something that I miss a lot. So, I know I made a joke about the palsy earlier. I guess we should probably let the cat out of the bag and let people know that I have a mild form of cerebral palsy, and I'm a wheelchair user, so I've been born with a disability. So I really kind of got into punk rock around the age of 15, and I started going to punk shows in my home city of Rockford, Illinois. And the first venue that I really fell in love with was a coffee shop called the Divine Cup, which was run by the Salvation Army. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you're familiar with an old Christian ska band called the Insiders.
I very much am familiar with the Insiders.
So the drummer from the Insiders ran that coffee shop.
Okay. Cool.
And so I saw a lot of really great bands come up from there, and it was kind of the first place that I really felt like I belonged. And I had a really tough time my freshman year of high school, and after I started going to shows, people started noticing that I was wearing a Black Flag shirt all the time, and that's when the older punk kids told people to stop making fun of me. And from there, I eventually got into some bands, nothing really to brag about. I always had a really inherent business mind for music, so I was always really good about like getting shows and getting paid really well. But a lot of bands were really hesitant about bringing in a guy in a wheelchair into their band because they didn't want to be a gimmick band. And then also just the fact that I can't drive, like it was hard to get to practices and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So around the time that I was in pastoral school, or some of your listeners might know the name Master's Commission, around the time that I ended high school and went into Master's Commission, I started booking shows, and that's been something that I've done on and off for years. And currently, I work for a record label called Independent Ear Records, and I'm a tour manager for a indie pop artist named James Rawson, who also co-hosts my podcast, the Vultures Like Beat podcast.
Very cool. So the bands that you were in, did you guys ever do any recordings? Is there any online presence for any of those projects?
If there is, I don't really know about them. I was in like a band that went nowhere with my friend Jacoby called The Orphans, which was just like a crazy thrash punk band, and we recorded off of like Windows voice recorder, and we hung a very old like PC mic from his drop ceiling to pick up both guitar and vocals. And so there might be one or two of those still around. My bands were around before the age of YouTube, so I don't really think you're going to find any videos or anything. But I've been kind of toying around with the idea of like getting back into a hardcore band. You know, if anyone's looking for a nearly 30-year-old crippled guy to, do vocals.
Cool. Yeah, I always ask because I don't know. I like love digging up old bands on the internet, and if there would be a presence, I like to link the just put a link to an old MySpace page or whatever in the show notes, because I like geeky stuff like that.
Yeah, I really wish there was, because usually when people talk to me and like I let them know that I used to be in a hardcore band, they never believe me. It was like, no, you weren't. And I was like, yes, I was. I was really good at it. One of the only things I'm good at: growing a beard and screaming.
So going to shows, I know you mentioned being in a wheelchair. Let's talk about accessibility. What kind of issues have you run into with accessibility at shows and in venues and whatnot?
Oh man, I mean, also like I toured a lot, so I've seen a lot of venues, and they're never accessible. And like, man, there's been times where I can't get into a venue that I'm playing at. There's been times where I pay to see a band and I can't even see the stage because there's no accessibility. Mm-hmm. That's a real heartbreaker of just the scene overall, and especially in the hardcore punk scene. Like, a lot of people tout inclusivity, and often, people with accessibility needs often get left out of that conversation often, and that's just kind of across the board. Disability is, I like to say, is kind of the last true front of the social justice movement, because it never gets put in the same conversation as LGBT issues or race issues or feminism. And I'm not downplaying that any of those are important. Those are all incredibly important to me. I just think that disability is equally important to those things.
Yeah, I agree. Do you know much about... I'm asking because I don't know much about this organization, but do you know anything about Is This Venue Accessible, that website?
I've never heard of that, but, I would love to know more about that.
Yeah, and I'm actually, I'd seen a link about it once, and I didn't really follow up, and I guess they have a list of venues on there that are accessible, and I was just wondering if you knew anything about it. I personally don't, other than that it exists.
No, you know what, the really weird part is usually when I go to a show, I'm the only dude in a wheelchair there. Mm-hmm. And when I was younger, I was kind of like, if I saw another dude, I was like, whoa, dude, you're stepping on my turf. Like, I'm the crippled hardcore guy. So, yeah, that's probably a great resource. You know, sadly, when I came out to the Vineyard space in Rochester and when I first met you, I would venture to say that probably your venue was the most accessible out of all of them.
Awesome. I'm glad that we can provide that. I mean, I have other friends that are in wheelchairs as well, and it's been cool to be able to invite them out to a show or any kind of event there. But
I just know as a performer, just being able to, like, you know, have grab rails to piss and not be worried about if I'm going to fall over and, like, piss all over myself before a show was great.
yeah, I would imagine that'd be a positive thing.
Yeah, I'd just, like, walking out on stage and then just piss all over my left leg, and I'm like, so who wants to hear stories from my book?
Well, we can get to that. Let's, you mentioned performing. You said that you used to be in hardcore bands, but you didn't tell the listeners about what your performing now entails, and just explain that a little bit further.
So, often people tell me, well, it took me 7 years straight to zen a beard trimming. And most of that is because I just suck at writing. Or I just really hate the process of writing. It's really brutal for me. And throughout that entire process, people would often ask me, why do you think anyone will want to read your book? And I would always just kind of say, well, I believe in my story enough. And I knew that I'm a much stronger speaker than I am a writer. I think that I'm a proficient writer, but I think that I really excel when I'm able to use my voice and to just tell stories. And so I knew that that was really the way to really get people behind my book, is when I would go out and I knew that doing readings is dumb because, you know, if you're an author and you do readings, I think that you're really full of yourself, because generally, unless, like, you're a really big author, nobody wants to hear you read your own book. Mm-hmm. So I knew that I had to figure out a way to tell my story without, you know, just reading my book, because I figured if people wanted to read my book, they would just read my book. So if they're coming out to see me and they're paying money, then I should be giving them something, you know, different than what they can experience with just a book. So a huge influence of mine since I was a teenager was Henry Rollins of Black Flag. Mm-hmm. And he writes books as well, but he's really an amazing storyteller. And I've been doing storytelling probably for the last 5 years or so. And so what I do is I'll tell stories from my life, and I'll throw in a couple from the book, but mostly, like, I'm just sharing stories of my life, whether that's like crazy bathroom accidents or experiences at shows, or my experience with being a part of evangelical Christianity for a good portion of my life and dealing with faith healers. So when I get on stage, I really look to give people an experience of otherness and at the same time a camaraderie.
Have people assume that what you're doing is more in the vein of stand-up comedy, or do people get it that it's just storytelling?
You know, unfortunately, like with my last book tour, you know, I really wanted to do house show tours, and when I partnered up with the record label, that was kind of the idea that I pitched at first, and then somehow or another it turned into getting me booked at bars. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that a lot of my story does have a lot of struggle in it. I'm sure you've read the book. I mean, there's some pretty heartbreaking stuff in there. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, it's also paired with a lot of, like, really light, funny things. And so I remember specifically being at a jazz bar in Chicago on my last book tour, on a Wednesday, getting up on stage and being like, okay, this is going to bomb. So I kind of had to switch it up immediately to doing more of a stand-up routine. So sometimes I get misconstrued as a stand-up routine, but I think that some people do get it as, like, you know, I'm not a stand-up comic. First of all, I'm really bad at standing up as a crippled brother.
Actually, but a side note,
I definitely get a lot of people saying, like, you know, you'd be a lot better stand-up if you didn't tell so many sad stories.
Actually, I have a friend with muscular dystrophy who's been talking about wanting to do stand-up just because he thinks it would be hilarious for him to be a stand-up comedian.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that's probably one of the most frustrating things about being a brother of the crippled persuasion is that people don't allow it to be funny at times. Because it can be very funny. And, you know, I've dabbled in the stand-up arena a lot since I was a teenager. For a while, I kind of thought about going that route completely. I've been writing a few one-man shows over the years. So, you know, it's a hard road, but if he's got the gift of the gab, you know, just the fact that he has a non-normative body is going to grab the audience to a certain extent. So, you know, I would say go for it.
Yeah, I hope he does. He's a pretty funny guy. So you mentioned that you have actually done your storytelling in a more of a comedy club setting.
Yeah,
and that has that gone well? Because I can think of comedians that, to me, I don't think like Mike Birbiglia does stand up, but I just think of him as more of a storyteller type of a thing.
Yeah, actually, he's kind of one of my biggest influences, and I often get compared to him or Louis C.K., which it's mind-boggling that people compare those two to me because they're just so good at what they do.
Yeah. And very different.
Very different. You know, I think sometimes it's gone very well. One of the things that I'm very good at is kind of just going on the fly and immediately knowing that what I have planned is going to bomb and just go for it. Also, after I left Rochester on my last book tour, when I played at Vineyard, we had a show in Brooklyn, and then we had like a 5-day gap between Brooklyn and the last show, or we had like a 3-day gap between Brooklyn and a show in Baltimore. So we stayed like 2 days in Connecticut, and me being who I am, I was like, man, I can't just sit here for 2 days. So I actually jumped on open mics in like these really crappy bars in Bolton, Colorado. Or no, not Bolton, Colorado, Bolton, Connecticut.
Gotcha.
And that was rough. But sometimes when I'm in rough situations, I just hope that somebody heckles me. So, for instance, I got heckled at the second show of the tour at that jazz club in Chicago, and I was telling a story about being on a date with a woman who was like trying to convince me to take on her sexually transmitted disease, like through guilt. It was odd. It's probably going to be somewhere in my book. And in my set, I kind of jump into this conversation I have with myself in my head of this woman that I was on the date with was like, listen, if you don't accept my STD, that's like me not accepting you for your cerebral palsy. And during the set, I kind of go, well, I don't feel like that's the same because you can't catch my cerebral palsy, but I'll have your STD forever, and then I'll be double crippled. And then this guy who had been heckling me like 2 other times during my set yelled out, worth it. And so that, because I'm pretty quick on my palsied feet, I said, really, sir? Because you definitely seem like you got the STD thing down, but you don't look palsied at all. And immediately the whole crowd just went, ooh, and then that dude shut up for the rest of my set. And actually 2 people came up to me and they were like, I'm buying your book just because you burned that guy so bad.
Nice.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that what I do can work really well if people know what they're coming for. If people are coming there specifically for stand-up, they're probably going to be really caught off guard by me. And so that's why I really try to do a lot of DIY tours and house show tours where it's more of an intimate setting where people can kind of let their guard down. And I can tell stories of heartbreak, but also I can tell stories with a lot of levity.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So you mentioned you have another book in the works, so what can you tell me about that?
You know, I can't really tell you a whole lot. Unfortunately, I'm dealing with some complications. First book, and so I really don't know what the future of the Zen of beard trimming is going to be currently, and that dramatically affects this next book, because if things go really badly, I might have to rewrite the Zen of beard trimming merged with this book that I got working in my head. I'm going to tell you that one of the things that people tell me when they read the Zen of beard trimming is they're just like, it's just so brutal. And this next book that I hope to write is going to be even more brutal, but I really hope that people are equally as touched by it as they were with the Zen of beard trimming. I think probably one of the coolest things that happens is you know, every so often I'll just get kind of like a random Facebook message from someone that just read the book, and they just say like, you know, this book means a lot to me, and I didn't expect it to mean so much to me, and I want to thank you for writing it. And whenever I read those messages, I'm kind of thinking, man, just wait till you read the next book.
Cool. Awesome. So will it be in the same style?
Yeah, you know, a lot of people have suggested to me to like different ways in which I could write, and I feel like I'm not as good of a writer as people like to believe that I am, and I'm just really good at telling my own story, and that's because I've honed that skill out of survival as a person who's kind of cast in a label of other as a person with disability. I learned really quickly that if I don't tell my own story, that somebody else does. And so I'm just really good at telling my own story, and you know, I like the raw, like, honesty that you have to bring when writing a memoir about your own life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you had mentioned your past interactions with evangelical Christianity. So I just want to ask, how does faith impact your current writing and your current projects?
You know, I always like to quote one of my favorite songs by a band called Me Without You, that says that the glass can only spill what it contains. And, you know, I can't separate my faith from who I am. And so I'm not an evangelical anymore. I'm wholeheartedly still a Christian. I'm just not an evangelical, which makes things very complicated for most American Christians. And I wrote an introduction to my book to kind of just let people know that, like, there's no separating faith from my story, but I don't really write about faith in this hopes of, you know, somebody becoming a Christian, because I think I think art with ulterior motives always sucks. And so I just write about God as I know in the moment. And a lot of my writing, I feel like I talk a lot about the abstractness of the God I know, and I more talk about the people that represent God in the ethos. So I don't so much write about God as I write about people's relationship with God and how that forms them as people.
Mm.
So I would probably say that I write a lot about my faith, but I don't know if people can necessarily say that I write about faith, because I write about my own faith, but I write a lot about kind of Christian culture that haven't really been a part of since I stopped pastoring back in 2010.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of weirdness in Christian culture that is interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I'm not really into bashing Christian culture, but I am into critiquing it. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes the line gets pretty fine. But I think that I'm a Christian anarchist. So one of the things that I kind of find in the tension of things is I'm always looking to separate Christendom from Christianity. Mm-hmm. I think Christendom, which is essentially the dominant structure, the dominant institution of Christianity as we know it, is probably the worst thing that ever happened to Christianity. Mm-hmm. So when we read the Hebrew scriptures and we read the Christian scriptures, the New Testament, you kind of see these overarching themes throughout the entire canon, which is really the religion of creation and the religion of empire. And for me, I just have very little interest in a religion of empire. And I'm always trying to figure out what a religion of creation looks like.
Very cool. Now, you use the phrase critiquing culture. And so, tell me about your new podcast.
My new podcast, I partner with indie electro-pop musician James Rawson, called the Vultures Like Me podcast. It's a podcast where we scavenge through pop culture and we are tearing apart today's trends. I've always been really, I jumped onto podcasting essentially as soon as I got my first iTunes account. I was just that was the first thing I did. And I always wanted to do one, and I kind of did one through YouTube about disability liberation called Cerebral Conversations, which is still up on my YouTube channel. I think we did 26 episodes.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna. Is it cool if I link to those in the show notes?
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah. That's what you're going to see. C.J. Campbell in his various stations of life, both bearded and not bearded. So, anyways, I have been working with James Rawson for about 8 or 9 months, and one of the things that we talked about is possibly doing a podcast together, and we're both really into pop culture and kind of really analyzing how things are connected. And there's a couple pop culture casts that I really like. One in particular is from the Homebrewed Christianity Network, and author Christian Pyatt does a really great podcast through them called the Homebrewed Christianity Pop Culture Cast. And so I knew that I wanted to do a podcast, but we really wanted to delve in deep to how pop culture connects to the more heavier things going on in society. So we just released our first episode on the social media effect, where we talked about 2 women's experiences with leaving social media, and also one model who just decided to stop all the fronting and started Instagramming her everyday life, which included her waxing her lips and getting her bowel irrigated to treat her irritable bowel syndrome. And then, so we release a podcast every other Thursday. We have a few in the can. We just recorded episode 4 at midnight last night.
Nice.
And then on the weeks that we don't have podcast, we do what's called our fresh meat recommendations of the week, where James and I recommend something that we're into. So with this first one, I recommended a show on Netflix, which is a murder mystery set in Wyoming called Longmire. James and I also talked about the new Star Wars that came out. So yeah, you can check that out by just going on vultureslikeMePodcast.tumblr.com, or you can check us out on Facebook or Twitter. We actually just hit 200 subscribers today, which we've only done one full episode, so I'm really stoked about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, evidently the chicks dig it.
Oh, so I wanted to ask you about this when we were talking about your book, but I can edit it and put this there, or I can just leave it here. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
But we're recording this. It's Thursday, February 11th. This will be coming out in a couple weeks because I've got some other interviews that are going to come first. But we both just watched Monday Night Raw on this past Monday, and within your book, you definitely talk about Daniel Bryan in your book. Am I correct? Am I just putting things together?
I don't know if I mentioned Daniel Bryan in the book, but I definitely mentioned watching pro wrestling with my neighbor Ron.
Yeah, I definitely remember that, and I think you may have mentioned him, but it's been too long since I've read the book.
Yeah.
And I can't remember. But either way, you and I have had conversations about him, so tell me about how his story influenced and impacted your life.
Oh, man. Dude, I might cry. Like, seriously? So, man, this is going to be hard because I've actually been writing a blog post about this very topic since after his retirement speech on Monday. And I keep crying throughout it, and I have to stop. So I'm hoping to, finish it by tomorrow. I guess I should start off with this, is a lot of people get really freaked out when they hear that I'm into pro wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually had people be like, yeah, but you're smart. And I've loved it since I was a little kid. And my first memory is growing up next to my mom when I was about 2 or so. And the news show, A Current Affair, just got over. And then Superstars came on. And I don't really remember what was on the TV, but I remember that there was wrestling. And then the next memory I really have of wrestling is when I was 3, my parents took me to a house show in Rockford for my birthday. And I remember seeing The Undertaker's and Paul Bear's funeral parlor. But the thing that I remember the most is Hulk Hogan coming out. And Hulk Hogan was my favorite. And I remember he was carrying the American flag, and it was him versus Sergeant Slaughter. And this was during, the height of Operation Desert Storm.
Yeah.
And I was, up, way far back, but I swear to you that Hulk Hogan looked directly at me. I remember I got one of those awesome Jim Duggan foam 2x4s.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and from then on, I had a pretty hard time growing up, but some of the best memories I had were involving wrestling. And, I remember, having these epic Iron Man matches with my brothers on the bunk beds and having Royal Rumble Battle Royals with all our stuffed animals and watching Monday Night Raw. But wrestling has meant a lot to me because it taught me a lot of things. I was a latchkey kid. I really didn't have a dad in my life, and my mom worked a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned a lot about, good and evil and perseverance all through wrestling. And I was actually a very soft-spoken kid, and, being a kid with disability can be very hard, and So I was soft-spoken, and on top of that, I actually stuttered really bad. Any sort of long vowel, I couldn't do. And our next-door neighbor's name was Andrew, so I just remember every time I wanted to say Andrew, I would just be like, hey, Andrew. And I felt so ostracized. But I remember watching wrestling and really watching my favorite wrestlers talk on the microphone taught me how to communicate. And it taught me how to slow things down, because some of the best talkers in pro wrestling really slowed things down with a cadence, which taught me to slow down. Because one of the problems that I had is that I was having so much going on in my head that my tongue just couldn't keep up with like what was going on. And so I learned to slow down, but also I learned how to project my voice. Mm-hmm. And then I learned the importance of inflection. And also on top of that, I grew up during the most popular time in all of American pro wrestling during the late 90s. So when all the kids on the playground were talking about wrestling, that gave me an in to talk to other kids, and that kind of dismantled a bit of that fear dynamic that a lot of the kids had about me. And I actually had my first like real friend in 5th grade. It was all centered around wrestling because we would always talk about Rey Mysterio. And after I left high school, I just kind of fell out of wrestling because I didn't have cable. And then while I was pastoring, I was staying the night at one of our parishioners' house, and he had cable. And I ended up turning on like the first season of WWE's like developmental league show called NXT. Mm-hmm. And there was this little scrawny dude named the American Dragon, Daniel Bryan. And Daniel Bryan I recognized as Bryan Danielson, who I had only seen pictures of in like wrestling magazines that I found in the trash, and like obscure videos on the internet in high school. He was like this indie wrestling legend, and he was known for this hard Japanese style of wrestling. And I thought to myself, I was like, oh, good for him. Like, he made it to WWE. And like, he's this scrawny, like, pale dude who doesn't look like he belongs, in place where like everyone is jacked huge. Mm-hmm. And then like flash forward a couple years later, I have to quit my pastoring job in upstate New York, and I move into my very first apartment that I'm talking to you in here in Illinois, and I start to watch wrestling with my neighbor, who also happens to have cerebral palsy. His name is Ron Jackson, and we are watching Monday Night Raw, and so that was really like the first time I watched Monday Night Raw in a couple of years, and I see Daniel Bryan again. I'm like, all right, he's still here, way to go. And I just really fell in love with who he was. He has this enigmatic, endearing passion, because he would just wrestle with this reckless abandon that you could feel. When I would watch Daniel Bryan wrestle, I would get the same kind of goosebumps that I would get when I would watch Henry Rollins perform in Black Flag. Mm-hmm. It was that same kind of just like raw passion, because he would just like, he would just like run across the ring and knee someone in the face, and then he would run across the other corner and do it, and then he would just dive like out of the ring in between the ropes and like hit him like a torpedo. And around that time is also when I decided to walk from my apartment here in Rockford, Illinois to Evanston, Illinois. It was a walk about 75 miles, and I used my crutches and wheelchair. And it was around that time that Daniel Bryan kind of first started getting this weird little groundswell, being someone special. And then a year later, he wins his first major title. And it was really weird because he just starts pointing his hands up in the air and yelling yes over and over and over, and it was almost annoying. And then as the months go on, he doesn't get this big title shot, and then everyone wants him to have it though. And every time he would come out, the whole crowd would point their hands in the air and chant yes over and over. And I'm sure you remember this just as well as I do. They were in Seattle, and they were getting ready to kind of gear up for that year's WrestleMania, and it was this same old match that they've done every single year. It was John Cena, who's your prototypical wrestler. I'm not saying that he's a bad guy. It's just he's your prototypical wrestler. And then this other guy named Randy Orton, who's a prototypical wrestler. And they're gearing up. They're like, these are the people that are going to be for the title. And they had all the wrestlers in the ring on stage and talking about how important this match is. And they're in Seattle, which is Daniel Bryan's kind of hometown. And the whole crowd just starts chanting yes over and over, and they completely hijack the whole thing. And for a year, it felt like wrestling fans like me, we just had this friend in the ring that we were all rooting for, because we all know that wrestling is predetermined, but we knew that this guy was special. So I think we all figured, hey, if we just keep cheering on this guy, eventually, they just have to do what we want them to do, right?
Yeah.
And, then it kind of comes to this thing where there's this big event called the Royal Rumble, which actually is probably my favorite pay-per-view. It's always been my favorite pay-per-view since I was a kid. And the thing is that it's 30 people in the ring, and then they all get thrown over the top rope. And the last person in the ring gets to fight for the title at WrestleMania. So we're all waiting for Daniel Bryan to come in. And then the 30th person gets in the ring, and Daniel Bryan is nowhere to be seen. It's actually Rey Mysterio, who was a guy that I really liked since I was a kid. And they were in Philadelphia, right? I think they were in Philadelphia.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, and so then the whole crowd is just no, we don't want this. And they just start booing. And then a former full-time wrestler who is now an actor who is, in Guardians of the Galaxy, Dave Bautista, ends up winning. And he was supposed to be the good guy, and everyone just boos. Bautista. And somehow it ends up that Daniel Bryan is going to wrestle at WrestleMania. But he has to beat the literal COO of the company first, and then that grants him the chance to be in the match with Randy Orton and Dave Bautista. So he ends up winning that match, and then the main event happens. And I don't know what happened, but I just got morphed into this world where I was that 3-year-old boy sitting in the Rockford Metro Center all over again, because Ron and I were sitting next to each other, and when he snapped on his finishing move called the Yes Lock on Dave Bautista, I just start yelling. You better tap! You better tap, you tribal tattoo tight jeans wearing motherfucker! And I just felt it. And then to watch Dave Bautista's tap was just incredible. And Ron and I just started choking up. And it was the weirdest thing. I have never felt that way about wrestling since I was a really little kid. And then I think one of the things about Daniel Bryan that resonates with me so deeply is that, my story is one of a lot of struggle and a lot of triumph, but there's a lot of heartbreak. So he ends up winning the title and then goes on his honeymoon. And while on his honeymoon, he finds out that his dad died. Mm-hmm. And then shortly after that, I feel like it was the same week, he started having weakness in his left side and found out that he needed to have neck surgery. and he had to vacate the title. And it was heartbreaking because we all felt what he felt. He was this guy that wasn't supposed to make it, and there was actually rumors that, like, the WWE, like the company itself, did not want him to be the most popular wrestler. Because, he had a long, scraggly beard, and he was too short, and he was too pale, and he was vegan and weird, and he almost quit wrestling to join the Peace Corps. And now, this friend that we had in the ring, his dad died, and he might never wrestle again. And then about 6 months later, he comes back, and he ends up winning a lesser title, and we're all excited because he's back. And a couple weeks after that, he gets a concussion, and then he was gone for a year, and we were kind of just waiting for our friend. And during this time, when I first saw him win the title, I remember thinking, he finally did it. And then I remember thinking, I have to finish this book. I have to finish this book. And so I just worked on this book for about 7 years. And then about a year and a half ago, my life hit sort of a full collapse. Of my support system, as I knew it, had kind of fallen to pieces, and living in systemic poverty had kind of, just put me in a really bad spot. I was denied going to community college for the 6th year in a row because I couldn't afford the $6 a day to get bus fare. I had lost a lot of my community of friends and support system. A lot of other things kind of happened, and I was dealing with just a lot, and then I was dealing with intrusive suicidal thoughts for about a month. And then my girlfriend at the time, which probably has been the most impactful relationship of my life to date, asked for space on our 1-year anniversary, and that's when I decided to check into a hospital because I knew that stuff was bad. I was in so much turmoil that I hadn't showered in 2 weeks because I was afraid of the razor blade that I kept in my shower, and so I went to a hospital for 8 days, and then I got discharged prematurely because I didn't have anything but a state medical card, and they didn't want to keep me any longer, so they literally just pulled me in a van and sent me back home. And then that night, my girlfriend at the time decided to end the relationship, and the last thing she ever said to me was "I love you so much," which was what she always said before we would say goodnight, and I lost it. And then I spent a week at my friend's house playing PlayStation, working out, crying, and eating ice cream sandwiches. And then I got on a plane and I went to Charlottesville, Virginia to look to kind of start my life over because there just aren't a lot of resources here in Rockford, Illinois. And so I had a fellow Christian anarchist friend of mine kind of invite me to stay with his family. But then they decided once I got there that, this whole systemic poverty thing is kind of a lot, and we don't know if we're set up to kind of fix it either. So I ended up coming back to Rockford, and when I got off the plane, I had to pass the last place that I kissed my ex-girlfriend, and I kind of knew that it was make or break time for me, and I knew that I had to finish this book. Before I left from Charlottesville, I did a storytelling event, and someone approached me who works with a publisher and asked me if I'd ever thought about publishing a book. So I gave her my card, and she read my blog while I was in Virginia, and then when I got back, I signed my very first publishing deal about 2 months later. And while I was in Virginia, I just wrote essentially the second half of the Zen of Beard Trimming. And the publisher of the Zen of Beard Trimming was in such a rush to kind of get me under contract that they actually had me sign the deal without the book being finished. And so I had about 2 weeks to finish it, and it was brutal because I had to write about some of the darkest times of my life, and I just didn't know if I could do it. And so sometimes when I would just be really overwhelmed, I would actually go on YouTube and I would just watch old Daniel Bryan matches, and then I finished the book. I think I finished it on, I want to say that I finished it on November 27th of 2014. Okay. And then it was released March 1st of 2015. But when I finished the Zen of Beard Trimming, which is a book, that I had been working on for the last 7 years of my life, and it was kind of, when everything fell apart, I always thought, well, I still have the book. When I write the book, stuff's going to be better. And when I finished that book, it was weird because the only thing that I could do is bawl my eyes out and scream yes. So for about the last year, everyone has been kind of waiting for Daniel Bryan to come back, and he keeps getting cleared by all of these doctors that he sees, but he isn't getting cleared by WWE's corporate doctors. And we're kind of just all waiting, and, this year's WrestleMania is about 2 months away, so we're just kind of waiting for Daniel Bryan to come back. And then Monday afternoon, he tweets out, effective immediately, that he's retiring due to injuries. Mm-hmm. And this week's Raw was in Seattle. He, at the end of the show, comes in the ring, and his hair's cut, and his beard is cut down, and the entire crowd is just chanting yes. And he explains that, he had a recent brain scan and that his brain is not in a good place to be putting himself at risk for more concussions. But really the great thing is that he starts talking about first of, why he cut his hair and why he cut his beard. And he's such a humble guy. He does a lot of charity work, but he would never tweet about it. He would never draw attention to it. He just says, I'm just going to give one shameless plug. I cut my hair and donated it to a charity that makes wigs for kids who are going through radiation. Mm-hmm. And then he said, and I had to cut my beard just because I look stupid. And he just says, that he can't wrestle anymore, but he starts talking about all of the things that he's really thankful for. And, he says, I'm really thankful that I just gotta, take in this last moment with you all, chanting yes, and just closing my eyes and feeling that moment. And also, he's like, and I'm really going to miss diving through these ropes. And then, at this point, I'm, bawling my eyes, and I'm like, me too! I'm gonna miss that too! But then, he, throws out the big guns, and he starts talking about his dad, and he points to a fan in the crowd and says, my dad was sitting right there when you guys hijacked the show, and you let him know that I was really good. And he was like, that was the last time my dad got to see me wrestle. Mm. And so, now his career is over. And I think in some sort of ways we are dealing with a similar existential crisis. that Jesus' disciples did after his death. Not to, make this thing more melodramatic than what it is, but
Yeah.
I think that sometimes a good story can change people's lives. And Daniel Bryan lived a really great story as a wrestler, and I think he may go down as one of the most important wrestlers in his generation. But more importantly, he's probably not going to go down as the greatest wrestler of all time. But what is more important is I think that he's probably going to go down as one of the greatest human beings to be a wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I probably wouldn't have finished the Zena beer trimming without that kind of inspiration. And I probably wouldn't have so much joy and hope in the season that I'm in, where stuff with the book isn't going so well. Because I'm questioning the most core parts of who I am in this season of uncertainty, and it's kind of because of the story that is just some pro wrestler named Daniel Bryan that when I'm asked if there's still hope, I don't think that there's any more appropriate answer than to scream yes.
I've been looking for opportunities for wrestling to be brought up on this podcast, and so this was having you on was the perfect opportunity.
Yeah,
because of how it relates. You tie it in with your story, and yeah, it was. I was getting teary eyed listening to you tell Daniel Bryan's story. So.
Yeah, the really sad thing is, I'm just I wish I could just give him a copy of the book and just be like, you mean everything. Not that you're the most important person on the planet, but you're a really good dude. And please don't wrestle anymore because we want you to be healthy.
Yeah, for sure. As much as it sucks to not see him, I'd rather see him be healthy.
Yeah, because wasn't it awesome when he was like, my wife and I are planning to make babies. And then, the entire crowd chanted yes. And then he goes, that's what my wife says every night. And then the crowd just starts chanting, that's what she said.
It was amazing. It legitimately may have been one of the best wrestling promos of all time.
Yeah. My personal favorite was the late, great Dusty Rhodes' Hard Time.
No respect, no honor. There is no honor among thieves in the first place. He put hard times on Dusty Rhodes and his family. You don't know what hard times are, Daddy. Hard times are when the textile workers around this country are out of work. They got 4 or 5 kids and can't pay their wages, can't buy their food. Hard times are when the auto workers are out of work and they tell them go home. And hard times are when a man has worked at a job 30 years. 30 years. They give him a watch, kick him in the butt, and say, hey, a computer took your place, Daddy. That's hard time. That's hard time. And Ric Flair, you put hard times on this country by taking Dusty Rhodes out. That's hard time. And we all had hard times together. I admit I don't look like the athlete of the day supposed to look. My belly's just a little big. My hand is just a little big. But, brother, I am bad, and they know I'm bad. And there were two bad people. One was John Wayne, and he's dead, brother. And the other one's right here. Nature Boy Ric Flair. The world's heavyweight title belongs to these people. I'm going to reach out right now. I want you at home to know my hand is touching your hand for this gathering of the biggest body of people in this country, in this universe, all over the world now. Reach it out, because the love that was given me, and this time I will repay you now, because I will be the next world's heavyweight champion on this Hard Time Blues Dusty Rhodes Tour 85. And Ric Flair, Nature Boy, let me leave you with this. One way to hurt Ric Flair is to take what he cherishes more than anything in the world. That's the world's heavyweight title. I'm going to take it. I've been there twice. This time when I take it, Daddy, I'm going to take it for you. Let's gather for it. Don't let me down now, because I came back for you, for that man up there that died 10, 12 years ago and never got the opportunity to see a real world champion. And I'm proud of you, and thank God I have you. And I love you. Love you!
But I think that's just going to be seared in the most childlike, wondrous places of my heart forever. And like, that's the beauty about what pro wrestling can do, you know. And people make fun of it a lot, but I often argue about that it can be a really awesome medium for teaching people about life. But also, I think that one could make the argument that wrestling can be a really great medium for people to accept change, and wrestling could be a very awesome catalyst for people to change their preconceived notions about people and ideas, because there has been a long-standing history of sexism and racism and homophobia within the mythos of pro wrestling, but also at times it's been very progressive. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes wrestling can tell really great stories. And I think Daniel Bryan's a really great story. My other favorite dude is CM Punk, you know, and he was a guy that just kind of fought against the status quo and kind of fought against corporate ideals that he felt were unfair, and he kind of just like walked away from the business on his own terms, and then he like fought them and sued them. And so that has also inspired me as I'm dealing with all sorts of complications in my personal life, like just to keep fighting, you know. And granted, I don't have the same attachment that I have to CM Punk and the dude Daniel Bryan. I feel like Daniel Bryan is my friend, but CM Punk is the cool guy at the shows when I was in high school that I thought that I was cool, but I think he's really cool. That's what I feel about CM Punk.
Yeah, I didn't start. I mean, I was into wrestling as a kid, but didn't get into it again until the build up to WrestleMania 30. So Daniel Bryan was my favorite guy, and I kind of missed out on the whole CM Punk thing, unfortunately. I mean, I've been going back and watching some stuff on the network, but
oh yeah, it's not the same, man. Like, the really crazy thing is that I listen to so many wrestling podcasts that I have to routinely like delete podcasts because my hard drive on my MacBook gets filled up. And one of the first wrestling podcasts that I ever stumbled onto was Colt Cabana's Art of Wrestling. Mm-hmm. And he's CM Punk's best friend. And so when CM Punk kind of had his big breakout, promo moment that people call the infamous pipe bomb. He was like sitting on stage, Indian style, and just talking about how like the company sucked and how he's the best in the world, and that he's just not going to take this anymore. And then he like turns to a camera and waves "Hi, Colt." It was great. And so I got to hear the podcast right after that happened, where Colt Cabana is like, "So CM Punk said hi to me on national TV. That was cool."
Yeah, man. There's a kind of bringing it back. I mean, we talked about punk rock at the beginning of the interview. I think it's really cool to see how many connections to punk rock there are in wrestling. It just seems like there's a lot of people that are into both.
Yeah, well, we're in a really awesome time culturally where it's really cool to be a nerd.
Yeah.
Where, Adam, man, it's great. It's finally our time to shine. So it's cool to be into comic books. It's kind of cool to be into wrestling if you're in the right crowd. Like, indie wrestling is kind of a big deal now.
Yeah. And
there's a lot of great space, and like that's how punk rock came to be. Is like it was kind of in these dingy VFW halls. I mean, some of the best shows that I've ever been to have been in VFW halls, mm-hmm. And some of the very best wrestling shows that one can go to are going to be in VFW halls. And psychologist Abraham Maslow has the hierarchy of needs. And so it kind of starts at the bottom of the hierarchy of needs is your basic needs like food, shelter, water, and then you have your emotional needs of that that you're loved and things like that. And the next step from that is your social needs, and that's a place of belonging. And that's what really great art does, and that's what punk rock can do, is create space. That's what pro wrestling can do. But one of the issues that we're going to run into, just as you asked me earlier, is we have to be conscious about using the things that we love to create space, mm-hmm. to create sacred space for people to be. So that's why we have to make, our DIY bases accessible. That's why we have to make our wrestling not sexist and not racist, because that's when the best art forms are going to come out.
For sure. Have you listened to Damian Abraham's podcast? He's the dude from Fucked Up.
You've told me about it. I am so afraid of subscribing to another podcast because I probably have, I'm not kidding, I probably have like 4 months of podcasts on my hard drive right now.
Wow. Well, anyway, the reason I ask is because, I mean, he talks specifically about, like, how his guests got into punk, and it's mostly people in bands, but also he had Fred Armisen on there, and I know this will interest you, is 2 weeks ago he had MVP on there, the wrestler.
Yeah.
And this past week he had Robbie Brookside on there. Robbie Brookside, he's a trainer at NXT.
Yeah, he's kind of a British chain wrestling legend.
Yeah, the podcast is super cool. He goes super deep on a bunch of old punk bands and stuff. It's pretty rad.
Yeah, you know who's like really into like metal?
Who?
Is Regal.
Interesting. That doesn't really surprise me.
Yeah, like Regal is really into Iron Maiden.
Nice.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, man. Well, I think we'll wrap it up. But it's been great. It's been great talking to you. First of all, because we hadn't talked at length in a while. I know I didn't talk a whole lot, but it's always good chatting with you.
Yeah. I want to try to figure out a way to get back up to Rochester and eat a veggie garbage plate. Maybe watch a little wrestling. I guess my last words are just, I think a lot of our conversation has been all centered around, like, be open to new ideas and, like, new people and new experiences. So, like, we talked about making our spaces accessible. And we talked about people judging us about wrestling and punk rock and things like that. And I think that the overall thing is be open to these new experiences, because when I give lectures, at times I give lectures about ableism and disability liberation on college campuses, and one of the things that I always say is that the most important accessibility that I advocate for is the accessibility of your heart and the accessibility of your mind. Because if those things are accessible to me in my experience, then that means that getting a ramp built isn't going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Like getting into a punk show is not going to be a problem. But until that accessibility happens within you, it's not. So I know that some people are going, God, they talked about wrestling for like an hour. But we weren't talking about wrestling. What we were talking about is we were talking about our lives and what that meant to us. If you're interested in interacting with me, I'm definitely in a place where I need more friends in my life. I don't have like a Facebook fan page. I'm just a dude. You can send me a Facebook friend request at facebook.com/CJCampbell1986. You can follow me on Twitter. That's at CJLWNDD. I do have a Tumblr blog, The Running Search. That's CJCampbell.com or CJCampbell.tumblr.com. The Daniel Bryan post should be up soon.
Awesome.
Check out the Vultures Like Me podcast. We put out a podcast every other Thursday. And, I would say, push this podcast. Adam's a pretty cool dude. He puts on great shows at the Vineyard. I really wish that I lived in Rochester. Like, all of my favorite people are there. And if you're interested in booking me, you can contact me through Facebook. And maybe let me in your hardcore band.
Awesome. Like I was saying about wrestling, I got through, I think I've recorded 7 episodes so far, and it hasn't come up once. So all of the people that know me are impressed that I made it this far without talking about wrestling. So I think they can deal with the extended talk in this one.
Yeah, well, when I pulled in for our show at Vineyard, what was the very first thing I said to you?
You asked me if I'd seen Raw.
Yeah, what happened on Raw? Exactly.
And that was the week that Kevin Owens premiered, and it was...
I know, and I missed it, because I was on tour. #tour live.
I hope you all enjoyed my conversation with CJ. He is someone who I definitely would like to have on the show again, because we had a great time. Make sure you check out his book, The Zen of Beard Trimming, and also his podcast, Vultures Like Me. He's doing some really cool stuff, so make sure you check it out. Alright, I do have one correction from this episode. That Royal Rumble that we were talking about, it was not in Philadelphia, it was in Pittsburgh. So, if anyone cares, I just wanted to make sure we get it right. Alright, I think that's all I have for you today. Make sure you check out the things that CJ and I plugged in the episode. And I'll be back next week with another conversation with a friend. Thank you all for listening. Have a great week.